pendant, the kind of token a doctor might give someone special. The ultrasound was set for the following week. Daniel had planned to take the day off, but Claire suggested he stay at work. "It's just a routine scan," she said. "No need for you to miss your presentation." He agreed, then quietly rearranged his schedule and followed her to the clinic. From the waiting room window, he watched Claire embrace Dr. Falk in a way that lit his chest with searing anger. The hug lasted too long. When they pulled apart, Falk's hand lingered on her cheek. Daniel went home, poured 3 fingers of whiskey, opened his laptop, and began researching private DNA testing. The lab sat in a strip mall 20 minutes away between a dry cleaner and a tax office. He sat across from a technician named Janet, who looked like she'd cataloged every human disaster. "We'll need samples from both potential fathers," she said in a neutral, professional tone. "I have hair from my wife's brush," Daniel said, sliding an envelope across the desk, "and I can give a sample now." Janet nodded. "Results take 5 to 7 business days. We'll call when they're ready." The weight almost destroyed him. He moved through the rituals of normal life, work, dinner table chatter, pretending excitement about the pregnancy, while Claire seemed more relaxed than in months, humming as she cooked and talking about converting the spare room into a nursery. "I was thinking yellow," she said one night, flipping paint swatches. "Gender neutral, but warm." Daniel watched from across the table. Her skin had that pregnant glow, and she'd started dressing in looser clothes. If he hadn't seen the test, he might have believed she was truly excited. On Thursday, his phone rang during a budget meeting. "Mr. Hayes, this is Janet from the lab. Your results are ready, but I think you should come in to discuss them in person." Daniel's mouth went dry. "That bad? Just come in when you can." He left early, claiming a dental appointment. The drive to the lab felt like a commute to his execution. Janet met him with a manila folder and an expression more suited to a funeral. "I'm sorry," she said before he sat down. "The child isn't yours." Daniel nodded slowly, surprised at how calm he felt. Part of him had known from the moment he'd seen the test. "There's more," Janet said, opening the folder. "We run samples against our database as a routine to catch mix-ups." "What does that mean?" "Someone else used our services before." The sample matched a name. She slid a sheet across the desk. "Dr. Adrian Falk." Daniel stared until the letters blurred. Not only was the child not his, it matched the man they'd been paying to help them conceive. The man Claire had been meeting in secret, the man whose pendant she wore. How long ago had that sample been taken? 18 months, Janet said, checking her computer. He submitted it during a fertility screening for his own wife. The irony was bitter. While helping other couples conceive, Dr. Falk had been testing his own fertility, and apparently using it on Daniel's wife. "I need copies of everything," Daniel said. "Everything," he repeated, pulling out his checkbook. Janet studied him a long moment, then printed several pages. "I never met you," she said softly. Daniel parked behind a grocery store and sat reading the results until the numbers and dates stopped meaning anything and simply proved the same awful truth. DNA doesn't lie. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire, picking up groceries. "Need anything?" He stared at it, then typed back, "Just milk." That evening Claire made his favorite, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, and had even bought wine, which she poured into a juice glass to keep up appearances of pregnancy. "I have something to tell you," she said during dinner, eyes bright with counterfeit excitement. Daniel's fork paused midair. "What's that?" "I've been thinking about names. If it's a boy, I want to name him Adrian." The pot roast turned to ash in his mouth. She was going to name their fake baby after her lover. The audacity stunned him. "That's nice," he managed. "After anyone in particular?" "Not really. You cheated, brought me someone else's child, and expected me to raise both of you." What a laugh. The pregnancy stick sat on the bathroom counter like a loaded weapon. After 4 years of failed IVF cycles, 2 pink lines felt impossible. Daniel Hayes stared at it, waiting for his heart to leap or the tears of joy to come. Instead, a cold knot tightened in his gut. "Danny!" Claire's voice floated from the bedroom, honeyed and contrived with a vulnerability he didn't trust. "What does it say?" He lifted the test with hands that trembled. The timing felt wrong. They hadn't been intimate in months. Claire always had a headache, or work stress, or some excuse to dodge his touch. Yet now she was pregnant after their most recent visit to Dr. Adrian Falk. "It's positive," he called back, forcing cheer into his tone. Claire appeared in the doorway, her face lit not by surprise but by something like relief. She wrapped her arms around him and he caught a trace of cologne that wasn't his. "I can't believe it," she murmured against his chest. "After everything we've been through." Daniel held her, but his eyes stayed locked on the test. Something had been off for months, he'd felt it. The late nights at the office, the furtive phone calls, the way she avoided his gaze when they discussed their treatments. That evening they rang her parents with the news. Claire's mother sobbed with happiness. Her father promised to come soon. Through it all, Daniel smiled and said what was expected, even as cold poison spread through his chest. "We should celebrate," Claire said after they hung up. "Maybe try that new place downtown." "Sure," Daniel answered, watching her closely. She seemed happier than she had in years, but it wasn't the warm, shared kind of joy. There was a calculating glint in her eyes, like someone who'd just taken a prize from a game he hadn't known existed. The next morning he sat in Dr. Falk's office for their routine follow-up. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and hollow hope, the walls plastered with photos of success stories that suddenly felt like mockery. "Congratulations, Doctor," Falk said, grasping Daniel's hand with both of his. The handshake lingered, the doctor's smile a little too self-satisfied. "This is exactly what we'd hoped for." Daniel nodded, scrutinizing Falk. The man was in his 50s, silver at the temples, the kind of assuredness that comes from years of deciding other people's futures. He'd run the clinic for 15 years and was known as a leading fertility specialist in the city. "How are you feeling?" Claire asked, her voice dipping to a private register that made Daniel's jaw clench. "Wonderful," she answered, and Daniel noticed the way her eyes met his in the office window's reflection, a look that lingered fractionally too long. "We'll want to monitor you closely," Falk added, his hand settling on Claire's shoulder. "This is a precious miracle." The word precious struck Daniel like a slap. The same word Claire had breathed into his ear in bed 6 months earlier, before the distance, before the headaches and the secrets. Walking to the parking garage after the appointment, Claire chatted animatedly about nursery colors and baby names. Her joy felt rehearsed, like someone performing a role she'd practiced. When she stepped aside to take a work call, he caught snippets. "Went perfectly. He doesn't suspect. A few more months." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He pretended to check his phone while straining to hear more, but Claire moved away. When she returned, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright. "Sorry, work drama," she laughed, an edge to it like shattering glass. That night Daniel lay awake beside a sleeping Claire whose breathing was even and guiltless. He thought about the last 4 years, the mounting credit card bills for treatments, the cycles of hope and despair. Claire had been the one pushing to keep trying, insisting they go on, insisting Falk was the right doctor because a friend Sarah had recommended him. But Sarah had moved to Seattle 2 years earlier. Why would she recommend a local specialist? The next morning, Claire left early for a client breakfast. Daniel waited until her car turned the corner, then followed to the clinic and sat in the lot for an hour watching. At 9:15, Claire's silver Honda pulled into a remote corner of the lot, away from the front entrance. She sat in her car for 10 minutes touching up makeup in the rearview mirror. When she finally stepped out, she walked to a side door Daniel had never noticed. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. 3 months pregnant, and she was meeting someone at the fertility clinic who wasn't her husband. He drove home in a stunned daze. In their bedroom, he opened Claire's jewelry box and found a silver chain he'd never seen before with a small caduceus. Claire shrugged. "I just like the sound of it." The lie slipped out of her easily. Daniel wondered how many others he'd missed. How long had this been happening? How deep did the betrayal run? "Adrian's a good name," he said finally. That night he lay awake cataloging evidence he'd need. Lawyers to call, assets to shield. Claire slept beside him with one hand resting on the still flat belly in a gesture that now felt obscene. He considered confronting her immediately, but something restrained him, maybe the lawyer in him. He'd practiced corporate litigation for 10 years before moving into real estate. You don't go to court until every T is crossed. You don't reveal your hand until you can ruin your opponent. The next morning Daniel called in sick and went to a small private investigation firm downtown. The office was tinier than he expected. 2 rooms above a sandwich shop, but the man behind the desk, Michael Torres, had the visage of someone who'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "You want to follow your wife?" Torres said flatly. It wasn't a question. I want to document her affair with her doctor. Torres raised an eyebrow. That's a new one. How long do you think it's been going on? Months, maybe longer. Daniel slid the DNA results across the desk. She's pregnant with his child and pretending it's mine. Torres whistled low. That's not just adultery. That's fraud, malpractice, probably half a dozen other crimes. He quoted a daily rate that made Daniel wince. But I'm guessing you want this done right. I want them destroyed, Daniel said quietly. Legally, financially, professionally. I want them to wish they'd never met. That's going to take time. And money. I have both. Torres smiled for the first time. Then we understand each other. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel lived 2 lives. By day, he played the eager expectant father, attending prenatal visits, holding Claire's hand through morning sickness, researching baby furniture online. By night, he met with Torres and a divorce attorney, Melissa Carter. The medical malpractice angle is gold, Carter said at their second meeting. Fertility doctors owe a fiduciary duty to patients. Using one's genetic material without consent isn't just unethical, it's criminal in this state. What about paternity fraud? Daniel asked. Trickier, she answered. But in this medical context we can make it stick. The emotional damages alone should be sizable. She tapped her pen against her legal pad. But we need more than DNA. That's just the beginning. Torres delivered the first batch of surveillance photos 3 days later. Claire and a doctor leaving a hotel together, holding hands in a park, kissing behind the clinic after hours. They're not even trying to be careful, Torres observed. Either stupid or arrogant. Both, Daniel said, studying a photo of Falk's hand on Claire's lower back as they entered a restaurant. What about his background? Clean professionally, but I'm digging. Guys like him usually have a pattern. Daniel locked the photos in his home safe beside the DNA results. He wanted more, enough to bury them so deep they'd never see daylight again. Claire's behavior grew bolder. She started taking work calls in the other room in low, intimate tones. She bought new lingerie and said it was to feel attractive despite her changing shape. She suggested they abstain from intimacy until the second trimester because it was safer. The performance was flawless. If he hadn't seen the DNA, he might have believed everything. At their next appointment, Falk seemed unusually at ease. He joked with Claire about morning sickness and recommended a restaurant Daniel had never heard of. When Daniel suggested celebrating with dinner, Falk proposed the same place. It's a wonderful spot, he said, eyes on Claire. Very intimate. Perfect for special occasions. After the appointment, Daniel followed them again. This time Falk drove Claire to an upscale neighborhood across town and pulled into the driveway of a sprawling colonial. Daniel parked down the block and called Torres. That's his house, the investigator confirmed 20 minutes later. Wife's out of town, visiting her sister in Portland. Has been for the past week. Through the trees Daniel could see lights on in the upstairs windows. His wife was in another man's bedroom in another man's home carrying another man's child while he paid for her prenatal vitamins and picked up her dry cleaning. Rage flooded him hot and blinding. For a moment he wanted to march to the door and kick it in, but his legal instincts prevailed. Confronting them would only tip them off and give them time to erase evidence. Instead he bought a bottle of good scotch, poured a glass at home, and called Melissa. I want to start moving assets, he said softly. What timeline are we looking at? Soon. They're getting careless. They'll slip up. They did. 2 weeks later Claire said she was going to a weekend work retreat in the mountains. An hour after she left, Torres called with an update. They're not in the mountains, he said. They checked into the Grand View Resort under Falk's name. Booked the honeymoon suite. Daniel felt something cold and final settle in him. Get pictures. Everything. Torres delivered photographs Monday morning that destroyed whatever composure remained. Claire and Falk at a candlelit dinner, sharing dessert, strolling the resort's lakefront hand in hand, kissing on the balcony of their suite. Most damning, Claire clearly showed a pregnancy in a form-fitting dress with Falk's hand protectively on her belly. They're playing house, Daniel observed in an eerily calm voice. It gets worse, Torres said, sliding another envelope across the desk. I found 2 other women. Daniel looked up sharply. What? Previous patients, Torres explained. Both conceived after years of failed treatments, and both eventually realized their babies didn't resemble their husbands. Torres opened an envelope. DNA tests confirmed the obvious. The document sketched a portrait of a man who'd used his position to father children with desperate patience for at least 5 years. 2 other families ruined. 2 other marriages broken. 2 other men who'd unknowingly raised another man's children. Where are these women now? Daniel asked. One moved to Oregon after her divorce. The other remarried and doesn't want to talk about it. But they'll testify if we need them. Daniel studied the paperwork. Dr. Falk wasn't merely an adulterer. He was a serial predator who'd turned his practice into a breeding ground. Get me everything, Daniel said. Medical records, financials, patient lists. I want to know how many families this bastard destroyed. That evening, Claire returned from her retreat, brimming with tales of team building and mountain hikes. She looked refreshed and radiant as she unpacked, having bought new clothes, expensive lingerie, and a maternity dress similar to the one she'd. She asked about her weekend as they prepared for bed, the dress she'd worn in those photos still lingering between them. How was your weekend? She said. Quiet, Daniel replied. I missed you. Claire smiled, kissed his cheek and echoed. I missed you too, but getting away cleared my head. I have a better perspective now. Perspective, the same view she'd enjoyed from the honeymoon suite with the man she'd been hiding. That's wonderful, Daniel said. We should plan our own trip before the baby arrives. Perfect, Claire answered, already pulling a new nightgown from the drawer. Daniel excused himself to brush his teeth, but really needed a moment to steady the rage boiling under his skin. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Hollow-eyed, angular, carved from ice. 3 more weeks to gather evidence. Torres logged regular meetings between Claire and Falk. Melissa Carter assembled a watertight legal strategy. Quietly, Daniel shifted half their shared assets into a trust she couldn't touch and stopped paying for any more fertility treatments. The last piece fell into place because Falk's own assistant, Beth, had grown uneasy and decided to speak. In a coffee shop across town, she told Melissa how Falk personally scheduled certain patients, refused to let anyone else touch their files, and always escorted them out the side door after hours. How many? Melissa asked. At least 6, maybe more, Beth answered. And she handed over appointment logs and billing statements that painted a chilling pattern of private procedures and after-hours consultations. The proof piled up. Dr. Falk had been systematically impregnating women in his care with his own genetic material for years. This isn't just fraud, Melissa said quietly. This is organized medical assault. The Attorney General will want this. Daniel looked at the papers spread across the conference table. His personal betrayal was part of something larger and uglier, but that didn't make the pain any smaller. I want them first, he said, meaning he wanted retribution before criminal proceedings swallowed the rest. Melissa agreed she could arrange it. They mapped a plan: invite Claire and Dr. Falk to a celebratory dinner under the pretense of thanking him for their miracle, book a private room with audio-visual gear, and expose the truth publicly. Make it public, Torres urged. You want witnesses, humiliation, not just confrontation. Daniel picked the Riverside Club, a place he knew and a room with a projection screen. Over breakfast on Thursday, he told Claire, I want to celebrate our miracle. I've asked Dr. Falk and his wife to dinner this Saturday. Claire went pale and then flushed. Is that necessary? She fretted. It's the least we can do, Daniel said. He gave us the greatest gift. Claire nodded slowly, her mind already scheming to warn her lover, but it was too late. Falk accepted with an enthusiasm that made Daniel's skin crawl. How thoughtful, he said on the phone. My wife will be delighted. Saturday came crisp and clear. Daniel arrived early to test the equipment and brief the staff. Everything had to be flawless. Claire wore a new black maternity dress, elegant and form-fitting, checking her phone and flinching at every noise. Dr. Falk arrived with his wife, a warm woman in her 50s who worked in school administration and proudly chirped about Adrian's many success stories. Daniel nearly choked on his wine at the phrase. Dinner began with polite small talk. Falk was jocular, nostalgic about medicine's early days, proud of the work he'd done helping couples conceive. Daniel stood, walked to the screen and said, I want to share something special, a little presentation about our journey to parenthood. Claire's eyes widened. Falk froze mid-bite. Daniel clicked the remote. The first slide displayed their original consultation at the clinic, the date and the bill prominent. 4 years ago, Claire and I began our fertility journey, Daniel narrated calmly, steady and conversational. We were hopeful but realistic. The next slide outlined their treatment history. Appointments, procedures, money spent, month after month of disappointment. Dr. Falk supported us through this, Daniel said, assuring us patience and the right approach would bring success. Click. A photo of Claire and Dr. Falk leaving the clinic 3 months earlier filled the screen. Timestamp clear. Mrs. Falk gasped. Dr. Falk turned white. It turns out, Daniel's voice hardened, that Dr. Falk had his own approach to helping us conceive. More photos. The hotel, the resort, the park, hand in hand, kissing behind the clinic. Mrs. Falk whispered, "Adrian." "I can explain," Falk began, but Daniel wasn't finished. Click. The DNA report bloomed on the screen. Key findings highlighted in red. "The child my wife is carrying," Daniel said, his tone icy and precise, "belongs to Dr. Adrian Falk, the man we paid to help us have a baby." The room detonated. Mrs. Falk hurled her wine glass. Claire tried to flee, but Daniel blocked her. "Sit," he ordered. Dr. Falk stammered about misunderstandings. Daniel clicked again. Hotel and resort charges, jewelry and flower purchases dated to the same times Falk had been billing clinic visits. Private appointment logs, after-hours sessions disguised as specialized consultations. Mrs. Falk began to sob, hands to her face. Claire sat frozen, tears carving tracks down her cheeks. But there was more. Daniel advanced the final slides. DNA matches, photos, and medical records from other patients. Proof of a pattern. 6 families, Daniel announced, voice ringing. 6 marriages destroyed. 6 children whose fathers are predators who used their medical authority to violate women. Falk lunged at the screen as if force could mute the truth. Daniel stepped between them and warned him with a quiet menace that froze the older man. Falk pleaded that it had been love, that it just happened. Daniel laughed. A brittle, breaking sound. "You manipulated desperate women, used your power, impregnated them without consent while their husbands paid for the treatments. That is not love, it's violation." Mrs. Falk sprang up, her chair clattering, and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she said. "No need," Daniel replied, calm as stone. "They're already on their way, along with the medical board, the district attorney, and a few journalists." Voices rose in the restaurant. Through the glass he saw uniformed officers speaking to the hostess. Falk tried to bargain, naming husbands, Robert Chen, Marcus Johnson, David Webb, as if making secret deals could save him. Claire's voice shook as she sputtered, "Danny, I can explain." "Explain what?" Daniel snapped. "That you lied for months? That you're carrying another man's child and tried to pass it off as mine? That you used our money to fund your affair?" His control fractured, and the woman beside him whispered, "I never meant for this to happen. It got complicated." Daniel repeated the word like a bad taste. "You know what's complicated? Trying for 4 years, going into debt for treatments, wondering if something was wrong with me. My body, my ability to be a father. That's complicated." 2 officers entered, followed by a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Assistant District Attorney Patricia Lopez. "Dr. Falk," she said formally, "you're under arrest for medical fraud, intimate attack, and violation of professional ethics. You have the right to remain silent." As Miranda was read, Daniel watched his wife's polished mask crumble. The performance was over. No more rehearsed smiles, no more staged joy about the pregnancy. Only the raw reality of what she had done. Mrs. Falk approached Daniel as her husband was handcuffed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "If there's anything I can do." "Make sure he never practices again," Daniel said. She nodded and followed the officers, still weeping. The room emptied around them until only a final officer remained to take notes. "Claire Hayes," he said, "I need to ask about your relationship with Dr. Falk." "I want a lawyer," she said automatically. "Smart choice," Daniel observed. As she was led away to be questioned, she turned and mouthed, "I did love you, once." "Once," Daniel agreed, "and not enough." The next 3 months were a blur of depositions, hearings, and relentless media coverage. The story went national. Fertility doctor used his own DNA to impregnate patients. Falk's clinic was shuttered pending investigation. His medical license suspended and then revoked after a hearing where protesters demanded justice. The criminal trial became a spectacle. 6 couples testified. DNA proved he'd fathered at least 8 children with patients over 5 years, and the prosecution portrayed him as a predator who weaponized trust. The defense argued the relationships were consensual, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours and returned guilty on all counts. Falk received a 12-year sentence and was ordered to pay damages to each victim. Claire's own trial on fraud was quieter but decisive. The recordings from their last dinner showed she knowingly deceived Daniel about paternity. She was sentenced to 2 years probation and ordered to pay restitution. The civil suit was even more satisfying. Melissa Carter methodically dismantled the defendant's defenses, exposing the affair and the calculated deceit. The emotional damages awarded ensured Daniel would never worry about money again. The fallout ruined Falk. His practice, reputation, marriage, and freedom were gone. The man who once wielded life and death authority now faced a decade behind bars. Claire's collapse was quieter but total. Her parents disowned her, friends drifted away, and she lost her job under the weight of public scrutiny. 6 months after the trial, Daniel bumped into her in a discount grocery. She was working as a cashier, her pregnancy obvious, her face drawn and aged. She kept her eyes down as she scanned his groceries, hands trembling. He asked politely, "How are you feeling?" "Fine," she whispered without looking up. "Good," he said. "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself and the baby." She mouthed an apology he could see but not hear. He nodded once and walked away, feeling neither satisfaction at her ruin nor pity for the choices that could not be undone. Their divorce finalized on a Tuesday in November. Daniel signed the papers in his lawyer's office while Claire signed alone at home. The settlement gave her precisely what the law required and nothing more. That evening, Daniel, having sold the house they once shared, sat in his new downtown apartment reading the final medical board report. The investigation had uncovered still more victims, 11 women in all, 11 families destroyed by one man's narcissism and perversity. Torres's text buzzed. Falk's appeal denied. He would serve the full sentence. Daniel poured a glass of good scotch, stepped onto his balcony and looked out over the city's millions of lights. Most honest, most decent, some not. He thought of the other betrayed husbands and the families torn apart. At least they had justice now. Melissa called to say 3 more couples had come forward, and they might have grounds for a class action suit against the clinic's insurer. "They deserve compensation," Daniel said. "What about you?" Melissa asked gently. "Are you ready to move on?" The fury that had driven him through months of investigation and litigation was finally ebbing, replaced by something like peace. "Yes," he answered. "I think I am." He stayed on the balcony for a long time, imagining, as he would the next day, a new house perhaps with a yard, maybe room for a family he might have one day with someone deserving of his trust. But for that night he stood in the quiet and let the knowledge settle. Justice had been done. Dr. Adrian Falk would spend the next 12 years behind bars, stripped of reputation, while his victims were finally vindicated. Claire would raise another man's child alone, forever marked by her choices. And Daniel would rebuild his life on truth instead of lies. The DNA had told the truth, and the consequences had followed.